Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In this week's episode we go through the painting of the roof, the spraying of the Raptor coat, putting everything back together, installing the windows, and finally driving the van back to our house to get ready to start on the inside of the conversion. In episode 7 we left off where we had finished painting the exterior of the van, not including the roof or the bottom sections. So in this episode we're going through the final prep work, getting ready to spray the roof of the van and a couple of other pieces. As you can see, Lauren's wet sanding, trying to get the grille pieces ready for the final coat of paint. We decided to wait until the end on those just because they're little pieces, and quite honestly, we almost forgot about them. So luckily we remembered the last time we were spraying, and we got the roof sprayed, which unfortunately we didn't get to get on video because we ran out of storage space on the memory cards. We had to go and download some of the video onto the laptop, but while that was happening we ended up spraying the roof. Because the weekend that we chose to do this, we had some very narrow weather windows on the second day. The first day we got really lucky, had some really good weather, got the body of the van painted in really good weather, and then in the morning on the next day when we did the roof, we had again some really good weather, but we knew we didn't have long. So we got the roof painted. That was quite the ordeal. I ended up coming out covered in paint pretty much because I was on my hands and knees spraying right in front of me. So luckily I had one of the Tyvek suits on, which I would highly recommend if you're painting a van, because I know that I can't stand the feeling of being sticky when you get done painting because all the overspray is stuck to your arm hair and leg hair and all over your body. So if you want one of those Tyvek suits, check out the link in the description below. You can find where we ordered it off of Amazon and get one for you as well. They're really cheap, about $8 I think, and it's probably the best $8 that I spent throughout the van conversion, aside from the tape. That was the automotive 3M tape that we used. Once again, link below if you need that. I would highly recommend it. So moving on to what we're doing here, we are taping off the doors, getting ready for the Raptor coat. The look that we were going for was having a black truck bed liner look below the bottom body line all the way down to the bottom of the van. And one, to kind of give it less of a van look and more of a off-road style kind of look is what we were going for. And two, to just make it a little more durable on the bottom, so like rocks and mud and anything else that we threw up. We wanted to try to avoid the paint chips, and so we figured, you know, the truck bed liner is supposed to go in the bed of the truck, so it's going to be a lot more durable than paint. So we ended up going with a Raptor Liner by Upol. You can find the link below to that as well. We ordered it off of Amazon. We got a lot more than we needed. We were able to do the whole van with a single truck bed kit, and we ended up buying a double truck bed kit. So in the future, whenever we do the roof rack, or we plan on doing an off-road bumper at some point, I'm probably going to do a weld your own type off-road bumper that will get Raptor coated as well. So we've got some extra, but if you want to do just the bottom of your van, you really only need the one truck bed's worth of Raptor coat, and that's basically a sprayable gallon of Raptor coat is what it ended up being. And when we sprayed it on, we only did a single coat, which I sprayed it on really thick, and that was basically because I had the gun really close, and I wanted it really close because when you spray Raptor coat, there's two ways to get the texture you want. One is to adjust the air pressure, and two is to adjust the distance you are away from the van, or the surface that you're painting, if you're painting something other than a van, obviously. And so I wanted a really aggressive texture, and I wanted really thick coverage on the first coat. So I stayed probably 4 to 6 inches away from the van, and it ended up, I mean, it looks really good. In certain lights, you can see the strokes that I was taking as I was painting it. So if I were to do it again, I would probably try to stay, for the texture that I wanted, I might have decreased the air pressure a little bit and stayed maybe 8 to 12 inches away from the van. And if you really want like a more speckled like sandpapery texture, then you can drop your air pressure slightly and go maybe 12 to 16 inches away from the surface that you're spraying, and that will give you a more sandpaper-like finish. And so we got the parts inside, let them dry. The Raptor coat had a time to dry of roughly 60 to 90 minutes is what you had before you needed to pull the tape. And this is because once the Raptor coat sets up, it really hardens. And so you run the risk of basically when you try to pull the tape off, it just pulls the entire Raptor coat with it. So you have to pull the tape before it completely cures, and that leaves like a slight wet edge basically as you pull the tape. You have to be really careful when you're pulling it so that you don't tear the Raptor coat effectively. And so we took our time with that, got all the tape off, let everything dry overnight, and we actually waited an entire week before we came back and started to assemble anything on the van. And that's just because we wanted to give the paint a lot of time to cure and set up, and the van sat inside the whole time, so it was protected, it was able to dry and everything. And so the next weekend we came back and we started cleaning off all the components. You can see Lauren there, she's going to town on the door handles, getting those ready to be put back on. Basically all the rubber and plastic components we cleaned with lacquer thinner, and this is a good method to use. It doesn't really dry out the rubber, doesn't affect the rubber seals at all. We did all the door seals this way. The only door seals that we bought to replace were the rear doors, and that was just because before we started the conversion, the rear door seal never really sealed the door completely, and we actually found that that was because the door latch was not properly adjusted. I probably could have gotten away with not buying the new seal kit, but looking back, it's probably not a bad thing to have new seals on the doors because our bed is going to be back there, and we really didn't want to run the risk of getting dirt and water and snow and sand and dust and all kind of stuff on our bed. But one thing on the older T1N Sprinters, like the Mercedes, Freightliner, Dodge T1N Sprinters like we've got, the rear door latch, it latches in 2 stages. So when you close the second door, the latch will click, and then if you actually look at it really closely, the latch is not completely locked. And if you push the door in and close it even farther, you'll see that the latch completely flips up vertical and a little catch comes down and grabs it. And our van, the second stage of that lock had never locked before, since we've owned it basically, and I didn't realize that, so I had adjusted it all the way in and tried to get it to close, not realizing that I needed to actually adjust the latch out to effectively grab the door. But that's something we learned when we installed the weather stripping, and you'll see that process as we get to it later. I don't think the camera actually shows it perfectly, but we do end up putting it on. So one thing that we did is the grill that goes in the hood, we tried to clean it up with some lacquer thinner, and it just wouldn't shine up quite the way we wanted it. So we ended up getting it as clean as we could, and we actually sprayed it with trim paint. And so you can see we're brushing it out with basically a toothbrush, getting it as clean as we can. Then we hit it with some trim paint, and eventually we install it on the van later in the video. And so there's a lot of little parts that went into the van, like the license plate holder, the magnetic door catches, the lights that illuminate the license plate, the tail lights, the headlights. All these parts ended up taking almost an entire day and then some to get in. Initially, I was thinking that it would probably take maybe 2 full 12-hour days with 3 people working on the van to get everything put back together. But I was actually pretty surprised at how fast it went, especially with Lauren and my dad going to town on it. We really made some quick progress on the van, putting all the little parts and pieces back together, and all the little things that actually make the van work like you'd want it to work. So it's kind of hard to see here, but my dad is putting on the rear door seal, and it's the type that it doesn't fit over an extruded piece of metal or a flange that sticks out, it actually rolls into the door frame. And this is something, it took us a couple tries to get it to roll in all the way around the perimeter of the door and fit like it was supposed to. So, and the other thing too is it came with no instructions, so it was really hard to tell which was the top and which was the bottom, because the extrusion, it was a one-piece extruder that was thermally fused basically to make a continuous loop so you wouldn't have a gap in the door seal. And the extrusion changed shape for either the bottom or the top, so we ended up putting it in upside down, and then we had to change it around and put it in the right way. And you can see us there, we're going around the outside, rolling the piece in that fits into that channel that we were talking about, and then putting the piece of weather stripping that goes down the center of the other door on the other side of the van, and getting those doors ready to be closed. That's where we learned about the latch not latching properly, which we didn't fix right then. We actually ended up fixing that later. And so Lauren, she's cleaning off all the parts that go, a lot of them are going inside the van, so like the door panels, the headlights, I think the windshield washers, all the little auxiliary pieces that go on the front. We're cleaning the grille, all that stuff. We had to move out of the garage, and it actually sat outside underneath the lean-to, so it was all covered with pollen, so we had to get that all clean and ready to go back in the van. So we got our bucket with all of our pieces that we had disassembled. One thing that we learned is the magnetic door catches on the van, the plastic pieces that held them in the side of the van, they really weren't designed to be taken in and out multiple times, and so when you close the door it took the little piece with it. So we ended up just taking a bolt and putting a big washer on the back of it and fixing that permanently so it will never come off the van again. And so we got the doors out and getting ready to put those back on. One thing that we did do is we bought new hardware for the sliding door, so all 3 roller assemblies we got new. And that's because when we took the sliding door off, initially I wasn't going to replace any of the hardware, but as we got the door apart we realized that one, the bottom roller that you can't see because it's under the tread plate was completely gone. There was no roller whatsoever, so it was just metal on plastic scraping in the track. The top rollers had flat spots on them where they did not spin anymore. They kind of just slid along the track. And then the side slider that was on the side of the van, it was actually the same way where there was big flat spots. So we ended up getting the complete replacement kit off of eBay for, I think it was like 50 bucks for all the door parts, and that ended up working out really well. It kind of was a pain to get the door adjusted again because obviously all the new rollers, the tolerances were different because there was actually rollers there. So we had to adjust how the door opened and closed, and that took a good while to get that dialed in. But we used a floor jack to get the door on the van so we wouldn't be struggling, because that door is not light. It's got a huge piece of glass in it, and we didn't want to run the risk of it falling or scraping down the side of the van or doing something like that. So we used a floor jack and got it in the tracks, and that's something, it's easiest to take the top track off of the door for the van when you're trying to put it back on, because you can get the one in the sliding track on the side really easily, and the bottom one, the track is really inside of the floor tread, so it's not in until you put the floor tread in. But that top one, there's a really small window where you can slide it in, and we found that it was really, really difficult to get it to go in while you're trying to manage the door and it's in the slider on the side of the van and all that. So we ended up taking that off, putting it in the track, and then bolting it back to the door. And basically we tried over and over to get the door to shut, and eventually we decided to give up on it at the moment because we couldn't get it to align properly. And as you can tell, the sun was beating down on the outside of the van, so it was getting pretty warm in there, and so we decided to just move on after a couple tries. We did adjust a little bit and got it to where it was really close, where we knew we could come back later when the van was in the shade and try to get it to fit the way we wanted to. And part of it was frustrating because I had already adjusted the door once with the old hardware on it before we did all the body work, so it's kind of like deja vu of trial and error 50 times over trying to get the door to line up with all the striker plates and everything. There's actually a PDF that shows the door alignment procedure, and I'll put a link to that below in the description. So if you have a T1N Sprinter, like the 96 to 04, or actually 06 I think was the year, Dodge, Freightliner, Mercedes, T1N Sprinter, you can find that below. That'll help you get your doors adjusted, because one thing you don't want to do is have your doors adjusted improperly, because every time you slam them, it'll just put stress on the mounting points, and eventually the doors will break. The spot welds will break, and then your doors will never close properly because you'll have to weld them back together or end up replacing the entire doors, which no one wants to do. For the front door, we use the same strategy where we put the jack under it and kind of got it into place and got the door on the van. One of the trickier things with the front door is it actually has it's like a spring-loaded actuator that basically holds the door in multiple positions as you're opening it, and it springs out farther than it really should, so we kind of had to fight that to get the doors on the hinges, but eventually we got both the doors on and we got ready to put together the front of the van. So we put the hood back on. Luckily everything lined back up where we thought it should. And one thing that we did before we put the hood on that you didn't see in the video is we took a dye and ran it over the threads that we had painted when we painted the hood. That's one thing. We could have masked off the 4 studs that stick down, but we forgot as we painted it. So running the dye over it really helped to get the nuts back on the other end of the threads and not have a bunch of problems when we were trying to get the hood on, holding it there while we were putting it back together, basically. So there's a lot of little components that go on the front of the van. We got the windshield wipers on, put the hood on, put our new little vent / grill in that my dad painted with some black paint, and we got ready to put the headlights in. And one thing that we were doing with the headlights is putting our new trim pieces on. Looking back, we could have replaced the headlights and got the actual Dodge style headlights where we wouldn't have had to modify the grille to put on the Mercedes grille, because on these vans the Dodge and Mercedes headlights are the same and they have the same trim pieces under them. The Freightliner versions, those are the ones that have the different grille and different headlights and different trim pieces under the headlights. But when everything got put back together, we were actually pretty pleased with how the grille turned out. We ended up modifying the pieces like you saw in the earlier episodes to fit. So if you're interested in that process and what we did to make those pieces fit like they should, check out the earlier episodes and you'll see that process. But we're getting those pieces put on, and we ended up having to add a couple of fasteners to the front of the van because the Mercedes grille attaches with different fasteners, and it wasn't actually like just drilling new holes and putting new screws in. There were holes there, so we had to add the little clip-on threaded inserts, which luckily my dad had a couple of those left over from a project that he had done on a restoration earlier. And so we just clipped those on and installed some new bolts to hold the Mercedes grille on. And it's amazing what that did to the look of the van. That basically like took it to a whole nother level in my book. That was something that in the beginning I was kind of not so sure that I wanted to spend the money on the grille, but Lauren convinced me, and looking back, Lauren definitely made the right call in convincing me to put that grille on the van, because it really just made the whole thing kind of tie together and look so much better than the Freightliner grille that was on it before. And there are some aftermarket grills out there that probably would have looked good as well, but personally I really like the way that the Mercedes grille looks on the front with the paint job and the black bumper and everything. And eventually when we put the off-road bumper on it with the winch and everything on the front, I think it'll still look really, really good, really clean. So moving on here, Lauren's cleaning off all the tint off the inside of the windows in the van. So that's one thing. The American Red Cross, they had tinted all the windows, and a lot of the tint had gotten scratched and torn and really just looked awful. So we decided to remove it all, and it really, like, driving the van, I mean, during the day and really more so at night, I guess, it makes it where you can actually see out of the windows. I'm not really a big fan of window tint to begin with, so I like the clean, non-tinted window look best. Getting the mirrors back on here, we had to feed the wire through that actuates the electronic mirrors. Unfortunately, the passenger side mirror doesn't work. We were hoping that unplugging it and plugging it back in and going through that process, there would be something in the wiring that just wasn't working that we would inadvertently fix by taking it apart and putting it back together. Kind of, you know, the Apple support where you, oh, have you hit the reset button kind of thing, hoping that would fix it. But unfortunately it didn't. But still, we've got the mirror over there where we can see out of the back now. And we got both of those installed. So I'm sure you've noticed in the videos, my dad has worked harder than me on this van conversion so far, and we're definitely very thankful for all his help. We really couldn't have done it without him. This is something I've never restored a car. I've painted a body panel once in my life, and I think actually then I just watched my dad paint it because I was worried I would mess it up kind of thing. So I know personally I've learned a ton from my dad in this process. We're definitely super thankful that we were able to use his shop and all of his tools and his knowledge, definitely his knowledge, to get this van looking the way it does. There's no way we ever would have got it there without him. So thanks, Dad. We really appreciate all the help and hard work that you put into the van. It definitely hasn't gone unnoticed. And another thing, my friend Justin from Diverse Designs, he came over to help out. He's putting in some dynamat into the doors, and basically the dynamat, what it does is it deadens sound. So it's like an adhesive backed aluminum sheet effectively, and a lot of people use it in hot rods, or if you're doing a lot of car stereo work and you want to make the doors quieter or different parts of the van or car would vibrate, you can put dynamat on it and it will dampen sounds and noise. It's actually really heavy, and that's part of what dampens the sound. And so in the doors in the front of the van, that's one of the main places I really wanted to make sure we got a good bit of dynamat. And that's because it's really just a sheet metal panel with a plastic cover over it. So you can hear a lot of the road noise coming through the door. And that's one thing. The little bit of driving that we did with the van before we started to do all the body work on it, it really was not fun to drive because it's loud. It basically felt like you were riding down the road in a huge tin can. And that's something that if we're going to be doing long road trips, we definitely want it to be comfortable. And another thing that's going to help that is spray foaming when we do the spray foam on the back. And so we took the time to put the dynamat all in the doors. If you want to put dynamat in your van, there's a link below. We got it off of Amazon, just like a lot of other things that we got for the van. It's really super easy to install. You basically just cut it to fit, stick it in there, and roll it on. And voila, you've got a quiet van. And you can stick it on the ceiling, you can stick it under your floorboards, you can stick it in your door panels, you can put it almost anywhere. It says on the box, and I believe it after putting it in, it will stick to anything. It's the stickiest stuff you've ever tried to put on anything. So definitely a great product. When we're going down the road now, the van is 100% quieter, and we haven't even sprayed from the back. So I am definitely excited to see how quiet the van gets when we spray from the back. Hopefully it'll feel like we're riding in a Cadillac going down the road. And another thing that I forgot to mention about Justin from Diverse Designs, he's actually done a complete van conversion and he sold the van. So if you're interested in doing a van conversion but you don't feel like you've got the skills that it takes to get the van conversion done, or your timeline says that you need somebody working on it full time, definitely check out his website. I'll put the link in the description below, and you can inquire about him building out your van instead of you. And I guarantee you it'll be a 5-star conversion, and you'll definitely be pleased with the van. So if you're interested in van conversion but don't have the time to do it yourself or the skills, check out his website, and I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about a van conversion. One thing that we didn't really touch on as we were going through is I took the window motor out and did the same replacement of the little plastic piece that I show in the how-to video. That is how to replace a window slider in a T1N Sprinter. There's a little plastic piece in there that tends to break. It broke on the passenger side, so when I did that one, I went ahead and ordered two because I knew I would be taking the van apart, and went ahead and replaced that while we had the window apart. So we got all the doors put back together, and we're going to go ahead and put some dynamat in the floorboards here, and this is over the area that we patched. So you can see we, as in the last videos, we welded in some plates into the floor, sealed it up with some seam sealer. That's the white stuff that you see on the floor, and now we're putting the dynamat over it to give us a little more quieter ride, because all that right there is really just a thin piece of sheet metal with nothing more than a little bit of undercoating on it to try to deaden the sound. So that was another area where we focused on putting dynamat in to try to make the van quieter than it was before. And we didn't put it on the bottom there because that's where the actual step tread mounts, and we didn't want to mess up that spacing and have it not fit the way it should. So put the step tread back in, everything lined up like it should, and we ended up calling it a night after that and got ready to put the windows in the next day. So because of the test fit that we did earlier before we painted the van, the install of the motion windows actually went really smooth. So all we did was put the adhesive backing on for the seal and press the window in and bolt it to the mounting flange that came with the window. And at first we were thinking that the van was actually too thick, where we were trying to basically compress the van between the window and the piece of molding that goes around the window on the inside. But it turns out that the molding will actually bend and kind of warp to the shape of the van, and it will pull that gasket in really snug. So the overall fitment of the windows, actually really pleased with how they went in. Because we did the test fit and added the material and all that stuff, that made for it to be a real simple install on this go round. So basically we just put the adhesive weather stripping on just like we did on the first window, stuck it in there, and then put the molding behind it and basically clamped it onto the van. And we just repeated that for both windows, and everything went really smoothly. Haven't had any leaks so far. The van's been in a torrential downpour, and the windows are still as weather tight as they should be. So overall, really pleased with how the motion windows went and how the entire project turned out. So now we've got a fully painted and restored van. We just got to put some wheels on it at some point, but overall I think she looks pretty good. And thanks again, Dad, for all the help and getting the van where it needs to be. So if you like what you saw in this week's episode, make sure to give us that thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below and we'll be sure to get back to you. And if you're ready for more, hit that subscribe button. We'll be back next week starting on the inside of the build. Thanks for watching.